The focus of AgSpire is to really improve resiliency and sustainability across the entire agricultural supply chain. We developed this Sustain Ag Network to put together a group of producers that were interested in making these interventions and land use changes and pairing them up with the programs that make the most sense for their operations.
One of the huge benefits of working with an advisor such as AgSpire, they're not going to can you into one specific one-size-fits-all program. They'll come out to your farm or ranch, they'll look at what you have going on, they'll bounce ideas off of you, but at the end of the day, you're also the one that's going to be able to make those decisions. When you look at the resiliency and the long-term benefits for the land, I think that's really important for the next generation.
AgSpire's approach when working with producers is we want to understand as much as we can about the operational goals that each producer has. Each farm and ranch is very different, and the last thing that we want to do is dictate practices or some of these environmental programs to producers if it doesn't fit their operation. And I think what really differentiates us is the direct work that our landowner advisors do.
I think the biggest benefits that I've seen on the implementing conservation practices are probably the reduced input costs, the resiliency for the soils, and then it also helps with your bottom line as far as cash flow. The money I make is probably the money I don't spend.
Our approach is to really do as much as we can to understand what drives profitability, decision making, and at the end of the day, fulfilling the goals of the operation.
We're going to get started off so we can get everybody out on a Friday evening. First and foremost, thank you so much for being here. I know I got a few texts and calls from folks that were stuck in some water situations, and so I just want to say thank you for being here. Thanks for being here with us this weekend to celebrate as well. But I really, on behalf of the entire AgSpire team, I can't tell you how appreciative I am for you guys being here today and to really get engaged with us. I think, from the perspective of what we want to talk about today is I want to tell you just a little bit about what AgSpire is. We're a relatively new company that's in a relatively new space, and so I want to set that groundwork. But really, we feel so blessed to bring you this panel today because we've got some folks that in the beef supply chain are very influential. And they've got such unique perspective on not only beef production, meat procurement, but really they're kind of on the tip of the spear from this sustainability discussion. And so I'm really excited for you guys to hear from them as well. Of course, what I'd really love for all of you to do is as you're listening to the presentation today, listening to this, please take some notes because we really are hoping to create a very robust Q&A when we're done. So a handful of you probably ask yourselves, what is AgSpire? And AgSpire is a company that was really built to design and implement sustainability programs. And one of our founders, Mr. Jared Knock, had this vision as he worked with producers, is he really saw the opportunity to work directly with farms and ranches that were already either implementing regenerative practices or willing to, and really take those regenerative practices and fulfill their operational goals. And so really the foundation of AgSpire is built on the farm, right? Our first priority is to work directly with farms and ranches to meet operational goals and to do that through these funding mechanisms, right? And so all of our mechanisms today are voluntary. They're all incentive-based and relatively short-term, which I'm not going to steal a lot of thunder from Jared in this panel because they're going to talk a lot about what the current landscape looks like in sustainability as well as what the future holds. So really, part of the evolution of AgSpire and working directly with farms and ranches was the creation of this Sustain Ag Network. And this is a network that is approaching about 400 farms and ranches across the United States. and really with one thing in common, and that is the willingness or the interest in participating in these types of programs, capturing incentives and using these programs to further the operational goals. That's again, I can't stress that enough. It's our main focus, is how can we move these things to help farms and ranches really secure revenue and produce more feed, grazing opportunities. Everything that we want to do more of as producers is what we're hoping to fund through these practices. And so this is where we're at today. We currently offer 5 programs with more on the in the very near future. And so this is a map of where we're active today. We work through grant programs. We work through privately funded programs, which Jared will talk more about. But really our foothold, our roots, and where we're doing the most work is in the beef supply chain. And so we're excited to talk with you about that today. So really, if you're a producer, if you're someone who's interested and not yet in the Sustain Ag Network, I would encourage you to join, because it really is, I think, the future in terms of capturing these incentives, capturing program opportunities, and really utilizing them to further your business goals. And so with that, guys, I'm going to turn it over to Jared Knock. Jared is the Vice President of Business Development for AgSpire and one of its founders. He knows about as much about this space as anyone that I've met, and I'm going to let him introduce this panel to you too, because I think it's going to blow your mind. I think what the knowledge in the room is, and the opportunity to hear from these folks. So with that, I'd like to give a warm welcome to Jared Knock.
Thank you, Ryan. I apologize to this part of the audience. Trust me, I'm here. I'll try and look over. I won't give too big of a monologue, although everyone's expecting it. But I will give a short introduction to those in the room that don't know me, and then give a personal reason of why sustainability in agriculture, especially beef production, is personally important to me, and then I would offer everybody else a chance to do so too. Their professional role and why this topic is important enough to travel here to speak with you today. So I farm and ranch in eastern South Dakota, about 2 hours northwest of here. Cattle, sheep, and hogs, diversified crop rotation. Been involved in ag business and ag retail alongside that for a lot of years. And when I think about, I always thought it was strange that we look to history thousands of years back, but we only look ahead a short amount of time. And when I was thinking about, most of my family, extended family actually too, is involved in agriculture and ranching to some degree. Most of my network and friends and friends are as well, and neighbors. And I was thinking, so what's going to keep animal agriculture viable for the long term, not just for the next 10 years, but a long time after that? What are those threats? And thinking through the ethical, consumption of animal protein, which has been really well, kind of mitigated by our animal welfare work as an industry over the years. Thinking about the human health component to animal protein consumption, which I think has amazing and fantastic stories that are really changing the narrative today. But it was really the environmental concern about cattle production and beef production particularly that I thought was probably the biggest risk factor to there being people, descendants or neighbors or friends on the acres that I'm on today, 100 years from now or beyond that, doing what we're able to do today. And was trying to seek a way to understand that, to explain it to both myself and to consumers, to make sure that we really are doing the right thing as ranches and farms on the land. And that led me into a journey of trying to understand the different components of what went into that. And it was conversations like, I'm going to pick on, Garrett, who came here today, we probably started AgSpire 9 years ago in your silencer chute when we were bantering around different ideas and things he could do. And you think back to the things that I know that he's done over the last 10 years, restoring, degraded farmland and saline areas back to perennial pasture, introducing livestock back to the landscape, sequestering carbon, doing all kinds of things that have not only a narrative value, but also a true outcome value that would help companies meet their sustainability goals if only they were captured and contained and passed through the supply chain. And so it was conversations I was having like that long before AgSpire started, that really got a few of us to get together and say, maybe we can take this one step further. So that's kind of my introduction, my personal background, and the why of why this is important enough for me to come and join you on a panel today.
Yeah, but deals with Friona Industries. We're a cattle feeding operation that's been family owned by the same family for 60 years. We have 8 feedlots from Garden City, Kansas to Lubbock, Texas. But I'm a South Dakota boy, born and raised by White Lake, South Dakota. Spent my first 20 years in cooperatives. Had the honor of working with Jared's dad when I was CEO of South Dakota Wheat Growers when Wally was on the board. And so it turns out to be a pretty small world. I'm going to start a little bit why I got involved with AgSpire is Ryan Eichler worked with my director of operations. He goes, we got to go talk to these guys. They're doing some really interesting stuff around sustainability, and they're based in Brookings, South Dakota. I figured, it's a day of my time. Can, drive out of the cities and come back and come out and walked in and met Jared and Ryan and Matt and sat down on things. And for me, the sustainability aspects for our businesses is all our businesses operate in a place where land resources and water resources have changed a lot over the last 30 years, and it's going to accelerate a lot more over the next 30 years. And how we are able to utilize those resources to maintain an industry and to build the system and to build opportunities that starts at the cow-calf level. Yes, I'm in feed yards, but it all starts with a sustainable cow-calf operation, both sustainable with the environment and sustainable around economics. And so, that's what we're trying to do within our organization is start at the cow-calf level with a passion and bring it forward.
Okay, yeah, it's on. Okay. The light didn't light up, so. My name's Tim Hardman. I'm the Global Sustainability Director for a company called Fulton Market Group. And I like to say that we're probably one of the best kept secrets in the industry. We will purchase about 700 million pounds of beef in the U.S. annually, and about probably 400 or 500 million pounds of pork for the McDonald's system. So we purchase all of the beef for McDonald's in Canada, the U.S., Australia, and New Zealand, and then we've got a team of people in Europe right now that by the beginning of next year we'll start the transition to buy all of the beef for McDonald's in Europe, which is probably another 600 million pounds. So we're large purchasers of beef. I think we're probably the largest single purchaser of beef in the world. My sustainability job, and I guess I'll start with my sustainability journey. In 2012, I moved to Edmonton, Alberta, and started managing a plant for Cargill that made all of the hamburger patties for McDonald's Canada. And in January of 2014, McDonald's said, somewhere in the world, we're going to purchase verified sustainable beef. We don't know for sure where, but they picked Canada. And so I was thrown into this world of sustainability. I was active in the Canadian beef industry just because of my job, and we were talking, the industry was talking about, do we set up a round table or not? And so, but very begrudgingly talking about those things. And McDonald's put that and made that very real in Canada. Not that it wasn't real in other places, but really made investment in what that might look like. And because of that announcement and because of that work, I spent the first year of that project on the Cargill side, and then I worked the second year of that project. I joined the World Wildlife Fund in the U.S. and was their beef director on their sustainable food team for 6 years before coming to Fulton Market Group. I think my why is because I think the industry has a great story to tell. It probably hasn't been told the right way or to the right people. And I think that we're the one industry, agriculture is the one industry that has the farthest, the most gains that we can make. But it's going to be around that storytelling. I mean, ultimately my why comes down to, I want to make sure that McDonald's can still sell beef and people still feel good about eating it. Because that's how I am employed, is because they sell meat. So, if they're
Yeah. Well, my name is Brady Wulf. I'm the producer side of the panel on the on the cow-calf side, I should say. So our family is in the Simmental and Sim Angus business in west central Minnesota. Starbuck, Minnesota is our town. Clear Springs Cattle Company is the name of our ranch. I work there with my wife, my brother, and my parents. And so we've been focusing on sustainability before we really knew that, hey, this is what sustainability is and entails. When ever since I was a little kid, my dad was putting just turnips or throwing some bin run wheat behind the wheat crop that we take out, and it's really evolved from there. And I'd say for me, the why is we seem to have to learn how to do more with the acres that we have, especially in our area. Acres aren't easy to come by for cattle, and whether it's people buying out land for hunting or government land that is we still have access to, but not regular access to. So we just kind of had to learn, how do we manage our grasslands? How do we manage our croplands to maximize the grazing, and then we learned more and more about what that does for the soil health, what that does for our water infiltration, and then have really seen the benefits and how that has made our operation more environmentally sustainable, which then in turn has helped us be more financially sustainable by saving on inputs such as fertilizer and chemical.
Thank you all. So I want to talk a little bit about, now we've talked about what's personally important to us, maybe about how this space has evolved, because talking about sustainability is really not new. In fact, we've been telling our story in agriculture for quite a long time. We've gotten rather good at it, and a lot of our organizations have helped with that and getting the narrative out there. What hasn't progressed along nearly as much is quantifying that outcome and being able to offer, science-based, estimates and quantification of what that outcome is. Don and Tim, can you talk a little bit about how that has changed over the years, especially maybe, Tim, you want to start, how that's changed over the years since you've been involved from this point into more, including more metrics into the narrative?
Yeah, I think it's evolved because of the consumer. We've got, and that's a pretty broad term, right? Everybody's a consumer, but I think it's changed in what the expectations are, and I will say the lack of knowledge by consumers. You look at the average consumer, they're however many generations removed from how food is produced and from food production. And I think we've got, I'll say young people, but I think people just want to know more about how their food is produced. And so that puts a little bit more pressure on us. I think that there's, especially in the U.S., well, everywhere, a lack of trust, a lack of who you trust and what you trust and where you get your sources of information from and things. And so from the data collection side, I think it's trust but verify. I think that's what our general consumer is asking for, is that verification. Now, from a McDonald's standpoint, our only customer, their biggest sustainability goal right now is around climate. It drives me a little bit nuts that has that's become very singularly focused on just carbon and carbon emissions removals and things like that. But it's what I tell McDonald's is, we have to deliver carbon, we have to measure that, and we have to have, some rigor behind those measurements, but that's not the story. And so what are the other things? And so we talk about producer livelihoods and community, building vibrant communities and keeping vibrant rural communities, and things like water and biodiversity that might be, water is probably easier to measure. Biodiversity might be tougher to measure from setting a particular metric. But it's, how do we build that story? How does McDonald's build that story? We have to deliver carbon to the board and to the shareholders. I don't think when I'm driving through McDonald's grabbing my quarter pounder, I'm not thinking about carbon emissions in that burger, right? Well, I am, but I'm probably an anomaly because that's all I think about. But I don't think their general consumer is. And so, when people say consumers' minds are shifting and their demands are shifting, I think it's boards, shareholders, But then I think we want to give people the right to eat beef, and remove some of the guilt that other organizations are trying to drive into eating beef. I want to try to remove that. We can't do that without numbers.
Don, I'm guessing that the conversations have elevated over the years as you work with a lot of large beef suppliers, from initially a sustainability director now to the president and higher levels of leadership around this topic. Is that true?
It is. For us, most of our cattle are harvested with Cargill. And so Cargill will bring people out, and they want to do quality assurance about animal well-being, animal welfare, and those types of things when they come to our facilities. And sustainability is coming a lot more into those conversations. Everyone today is measuring carbon, and there's a lot of goals around carbon. They want to address sustainability and animal well-being, harder to measure true sustainability in getting things done. I'm a firm believer the shareholders are driving carbon reduction. The consumers want sustainable animal welfare and animal well-being in their products. Those are the things that, when you look at the consumer side, and it has, Jared, for us as we're chatting with those folks, what they're asking us for today is, okay, this is fine. You have the animal for 200 days. What's happening for the life cycle going backwards? And so, for us, that has been the process. How do we work backwards, starting at the cow-calf, through the stocker, through the wheat pasture, clear through the cycle, to try and truly come up with metrics around sustainability that are going to resonate, that's measurable, that people can understand. Beef is the best regenerative ag there is. I mean, when you look at it, show me, chicken doesn't regenerate very much, when you look at things. But how do we measure it and put that in a manner that the common consumer is going to understand and feel good about is where I think our challenge is and what we need to continue to approach. But those are the questions when we have larger end users coming out. Those are the questions they're asking us. How are you going further than this? And how are you going back within the supply chains to measure this? And we don't ever get answers today.
So, Brady, I mentioned that my initial interest in this topic of sustainability around beef production was as a threat or a risk factor to the future. Since then, it's evolved quite a bit to where I see it as a tremendous opportunity. Brady, since we've interacted a lot more the last couple of years, you've kind of always been on that track. Tell me what you think are some opportunities within beef production and cow-calf production to really tell that sustainability story.
Yeah, I think Jared was at our farm and did a soil health presentation, and I think he said it best, and that's really stuck with me and my dad. And we use it when talking to a lot of people, but it's like a game of poker. And us as a beef industry, we're sitting here looking at our cards, don't think we have very good cards. But everybody else around the table, that's all the other players in this sustainability world, know that we have really good cards. And I think that's a great example because we are in a very advantageous spot. We have an on-farm vacation rental, and just to get people to come from the metro Twin Cities area, and they stay right in the house on the farm, right out the kitchen window is cows on grass. I mean, to them, that is the great, like, they just love to see that. They've been shown images of feed yards, and they think that that's where those animals spend their whole life, and there's that misconception. And so I think telling our story, start like you said, starting at the calf level, all the way through that life cycle of that animal, is a great opportunity to show what these cattle can do and what they can do for our landscapes. I could sit here and talk for a long time about different things that we've done in our area with local, like I said, local government ground, that we've just completely revitalized grasslands with our cows. And it goes back to, there's a measurable carbon, but there's also a lot of immeasurables like plant diversity, like water infiltration, controlling runoff, controlling wind erosion, that are a lot harder to measure, but they're all things that I can take you out to that area and show you. And so I think that's our huge opportunity, is just how do we get that to a larger audience? I mean, we're trying to do it with one group of renters every weekend all summer, but we're not making a very big dent with just the 20 people once a week. But there's definitely a story there to be told.
Now, each of us, probably have seen the slides or have a slide deck that shows about all the carbon goals that different companies may have that they aim to achieve. 2030 is a round number. I tell everybody these round number years are going to have a lot of intensity when it comes to reporting and expectations, right? So 2030 is kind of the first big round number coming up. Can you shed some light on just how important are those commitments that have been made to those organizations, and what do you think the priorities mean for them, those trying to get there?
I mean, to start?
Sure, yeah.
I would say from a company perspective, those commitments are extremely important. I think about, so 2030 scares me a lot. That's what keeps me up at night, is thinking about how can we help our customer meet their 2030 goal. And then I'm hoping to retire before we go to net zero in 2050. I'm hoping I have the chance to retire and the 2030 doesn't kill me. It's extremely important. I think if we look at, there's a pretty notorious lawsuit right now in the state of New York with a large packer about a goal that they set. And so it's really important from a legal standpoint that we work towards that. We work towards that openly, honestly. If I were to ask the CEO of McDonald's how important that is, it's probably the most important thing that he's got right now. I mean, other than, food safety and all of that stuff. From a public commitment, that is extremely important to them. They plan to meet that. The funny thing is that when they set that goal, they had no idea what it looked like to even measure it to achieve it.
Those people are probably retired now.
Yeah, and that's usually how it works. So yeah, it's extremely important, and it is. What I feel really good about is in the U.S. McDonald's system, they've actually started to make investments. So we're working with AgSpire on a couple of different things. They're actually looking to invest in the industry to drive change and help them meet their goal. But I think it's one of the first times that there's actually been private money come in that's meaningful, that I think will be meaningful.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. That does speak to that next evolution I was talking about. So moving it beyond a narrative, and some of you probably have experienced this in the room, right? We've done the storytelling. We've had the video crews out. We told our story. But I remember, they're not in the audience today, but a producer that when we were putting together some of our very first programs, they said, we've had probably 6 to 7 film crews out to our place and large companies talking about wanting to incorporate, what we're doing into that. But we've never received a market premium. We've never received an incentive payment. We've never actually got that back down to that financial viability that we need to really make this a priority in our operation, like you mentioned it is for the large companies. So one of the things that has evolved with AgSpire programs is say, well, I've been doing this, I've been looking at doing this for a lot of years, but putting it into a program that has the technical assistance aligned with monitoring, measurement, verification, and reporting all the way through is what allows that to become valuable. And while the numbers, are getting refined all the time and what the impact of some of those practices may be, once we can actually quantify it, we can start to assign value to it to bring back into the supply chain. So let's talk about tactically, Tim, you kind of broached on it a little bit about how you're getting involved in some incentive-based programs, but for each of you on the panel, Talk about tactically, what are some things that you're doing today that you weren't doing 2 years ago or 3 years ago that show that on-the-ground connection and impact, and what does that program or that approach look like?
Well, we're doing two things. Number one, we are working with Cargill and AgSpire, and we started a pilot program at the CalCab level with 15 producers, ranging in size and geography. We source cattle from a lot of different regions, so you got to go to those regions to help identify and understand what the opportunities are in those regions. And we're starting with those this year to help them go through the whole process of building a baseline, to develop the MMRVs, and then to actually work for a monetization of that going through to the end user. Cargill does have entities that have came to them and that are working through the system where they do want to start working on their Scope 3 emissions, which needs to be insets coming through that beef supply chain to get things done. We also own and operate an ethanol plant in Hereford, Texas, and all that co-product goes to our own cattle. So we went to 19 communities in the Midwest, and we're doing carbon scoring this year on 40,000 acres of corn. And so when you look at the difference of farming practices between no-till, between cover crops, and types of manure for fertilizer and everything else, so we're going to be carbon scoring that much grain that's going to affect the carbon score all the way through right down to the feed that's going into the animals. So our goal over the next 3 years is to develop a avenue from birth to box in order to build the chain. The challenge is always to get it to scale. Everyone comes in and that's great. Well, we're starting with this much. The goal is to understand by geography what are going to be the levers that we get to pull by geography in order to help to go from that. And AgSpire's our boots on the ground. There's one just thing that's a little bit off your topic, but I sat in with a lot of people that were making the goals and talking at 10,000 feet. None of them ever talked about what needed to be done at ground zero to start the action to get it to happen. And that was the thing that I, as part of the production system, was very discouraged about, is people were setting these goals with good intentions, but never thought about what's it going to take to make it happen, to truly get that to be realistic at ground zero, the people that are sitting in this room. And that was one thing that I was really surprised about.
Go ahead.
No, I would say, what we're doing different today than we were 2 or 3 years ago. I've only been with FMG for 3.5 years, and the company will be 7 years old this October. So we're a fairly new company. So what we've done is built a team, and that's an internal team that's helping our customer build their team, and then it's reaching out because when I say we've built our team, we just hired our third person to work in sustainability. She started 2 weeks ago. And so it's not a very big team, and we're a long ways away from where production actually happens, right? We're buying trimmings from the packers, from dead cattle. So we need to work on the live animal, right? Work at that phase of production. And so building that team with folks like AgSpire that have that experience and have those relationships, I think the biggest thing that we've realized is that we can't do this without partnerships, and the partnerships to get us closer to you all, partnerships to help bear some of the cost and some of the burden, and then partnerships with hopefully the boards and the investors that give us a little bit of runway here, because we're trying to figure this out as we go.
Mm-hmm. So Brady, you've been involved in, I know, several programs in the past in your farm that would cost share some of the things you're doing. Did a lot of it without any incentives or cost share as well. And I know you're a new participant and not all the way through your first year. So You're in a program called Grass is Greener, which is a partnership with South Dakota State University that we're implementing. What, just from your brief exposure so far, what's different about this kind of a program than any other programs you've been in the past?
Yeah, I think the one that stood out for me, or how simple it is. That was a big part that drove me through AgSpire, and what I was excited about is there's probably a lot of paperwork on your end, but on my end, there's not much, and that's the way I like it. So that was a big selling point for me, and that's what I saw that was different. But as well as I felt like it was really tailored more towards our operation. We're taking advantage of the native grass reseeding on one of our calving pastures that gets used heavy in the spring, and then we get off of there and let it rest. So we wanted to get some native grass and established to get better growth out of that pasture later on in the summer. And so something like that is a lot harder to pull the trigger on when you're just staring down the barrel of a native grass seeding bill that's pretty high. But when you can partner with somebody like AgSpire to help cover that, it kind of gives you the nudge you need, and that's going to help our grassland and our soil to do that. And then also it tied in well with our cover crop. But then it was the first ever program I saw that tied in the actual premiums on your beef cattle. Unfortunately, we don't qualify on all our calves since we're selling a lot of foals and keeping a lot of replacement efforts. But all of our calves that do go into the feedlot or to the sale barn to capture a little added value on those too was very unique with the Grass is Greener program, and what I was really excited about. So, yeah.
And that particular example is, I'm going to park on this a little bit because the value of what you're doing, you're going to see some advantage in midsummer forage. You're going to have better cover in that calving pasture. You're going to have more appropriate growth. But we're going to take that calving pasture, which is probably predominantly cool season introduced grasses, right? A lot of brome grass, Kentucky blue. You're probably too far east for crested, but some of those things. And we're gonna interseed that, manage it according to grazing, and try and get a C4 warm season grass established. I'm sure big blue stem, Indian grass, switchgrass in that mix. Those are grasses that have a 10-foot root system versus an 18-inch root system of Kentucky bluegrass. We're going to
sand too. I mean, that's where this pasture would burn up because we want to calve on sand because springtime we want to get rid of that water as quick as possible. But then it gets overgrazed because we're feeding cattle out there, so there's very little root system on that cool season grass. And so to get some warm season grasses established out there, and like you said, get some deep root systems in that sand that's going to be.
We're gonna. Yes, go ahead.
You lost your mic status.
Oh. So when we do that, we're going to increase that root zone, that growth layer of the soil from 18 inches down to 8 foot. We're going to take the root exudates coming from that root system and drive carbon down further and deeper in the soil structure, which is going to feed future growth. And ultimately, that's the carbon sequestration potential that we're going to quantify and measure with soil testing and other kind of innovative technologies to help McDonald's all the way through the supply chain say, this is an example of how exactly an individual producer in an individual spot is taking and sequestering carbon in the ground. We're going to use that against the overall LCA that McDonald's has for what they have for an impact on beef and allow them to hit their targets, right, in a very particular granular manner. And we're going to repeat that with that one individual program over the next 5 years for up to 250 to 300 different ranches in the upper Midwest and Southeast. Okay. I can't talk too much, so then I forget what the next questions are supposed to be. So when we talked about, okay, the very high level and then down a little bit tactically on what we're doing on an on-the-ground basis, and we got time for I'm going to ask maybe one more question here, and then we want to open up for the crowd, so we have time for that. But do you have an example of a time where, Brady hit on it a little bit, and maybe if somebody else wants to interject, of just how when the sustainability narrative coupled with the evolution into quantification has really been delivered in an impactful manner to someone either within or outside of agriculture to really open someone's eyes and change their way of thinking about how the beef industry is perceived. Anybody wants to go on there? Brady, you did a good job with that. If you get anything to elaborate on that there on some of those specifics, but we were just talking before that hopefully some of those conversations lead to more individual beef consumption.
Yeah, I'll just share a story that we were having off to the side before we started. But with our vacation rental, it's fun to we do farm tours, so you get to have a good conversation with the renters, and we talked. I was sitting down with a couple young couples, and talking about what we do on our operation, and then how the way we farm sequesters carbon. And I was like, yeah, I don't have the physical numbers. Hopefully AgSpire can get them for us eventually. But I was like, our cattle are sequestering way more carbon than they are ever putting out. And their jaws just about hit the floor, because they're like, that is not what we hear. That is not the story we've been told. And so they were like, you need to get that out more, so that way people know that, hey, these beef cattle are not these big carbon emitters that everybody claims them to be. They're actually helping put it into the soil and sequester carbon.
Excuse me. We spend part of the winter in Florida, or I should say my wife does. I still work. But where we live in Florida, let's just say there's not many people involved in agriculture. It's Snowbirdville and everything else, but mainly from further east in the United States. Let's put it that way. And their perception on cattle and agriculture in general is usually whatever they read in the Wall Street Journal. And just sitting around and chatting, well, what do you do? And, they look at me, well, one like, you got horns growing out of your head and, beef is bad. But when you do start chatting with them, it's how they upload their information, what they consider true information, and they're all light-colored hair, so they're not into social media for their information. But their challenge was to me, and I think the challenge is to all of us, when's the last time in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, or the Post that there was a positive article about beef and what it means and how we're doing things to improve? And that was a question I had. So that's not answering your question, but for those folks, and so I want us all to think about that, because, depending on the different audience, but that was the whole thing. That's their data inputs. And when was the last time our industry had a positive article in one of those? Last one out of the Wall Street Journal, one of them sent me was beef is the new coal. And then, we all love that one that was full of falsehoods and so I think that's the biggest thing that we as an industry got to think about.
I've got one real quick that I hope turns into a success story. With us acquiring the European business, the beef business for McDonald's, I've started to have some conversations with some of the markets over there, and I had a conversation with some folks in Germany probably a month ago, and they were talking about how are you gonna help us meet this goal? Their plan right now, or it's not a written down plan, but one of the things that they're thinking about is how can we, as McDonald's in Germany, sell less beef to help meet our goal? And that scares me as somebody who, we're going to go start buying beef over there and have a pretty heavy investment in that business. That those markets, and these are folks that work in sustainability for our customer, that's their thought process. And so we have a lot of, it's an uphill battle there. It's going to be, and we know that going into Europe. But we have to change that mindset within our own core group, let alone everyone else, right?
So it reminds me a little bit, you're talking about the sustainability community. I had a chance for one of our longer standing programs within AgSpire, a program we've been involved with for over 2 years now, to travel with Walmart and the Prime Pursuits team to give a presentation at the Sustainable Brands Council in San Diego. And this is all brands, so fashion, automotive, food, you name it. So thousands of people at this conference. And after a couple of days, it was pretty apparent there wasn't an ounce of beef served at this convention, right? It was primarily a vegetarian, almost vegan diet with a little bit of, chicken breast kind of hidden in the corner if you were patient enough not to fill your plate up first. But we were at the tail end of the conference, and so we were up there with some ranchers from Arkansas and Nebraska and the Walmart team. And we were talking about we showed videos actually of one of the ranches in Nebraska and talked about what it meant and showed the diverse native grasslands that were being maintained, preserved, and enhanced by livestock grazing. And how that story is that there's more of those acres in the U.S. that are preserved in grasslands and biodiversity than there are tilled acres in the U.S. And the beef industry is the only viable economic opportunity that allows that to continue to happen. And we mentioned, and I just kind of pointed out that, we've heard about biodiversity 1,000 times over the last 3 days. Yet the food that you've chosen to feed us is entirely created through monoculture agricultural systems. And there's no mention to the preservation of native ecosystems like the beef industry offers. And we offered examples of that and showed that side from the ranchers. And I'm not going to lie, of the probably 250 people in this breakout session, we had at least 8 or 10 people in tears afterwards, coming up, taking pictures with us, asking about our story, had never realized that everything that they're buying from the grocery store, except for beef, honey, lamb, and bison, if you can find it, is the product of a monoculture system, which is not maintaining native habitats. And so I think effectively combining the narrative in our storytelling with the metrics and the numbers that we're helping put together will drive a more meaningful sustainability conversation with consumers and with companies in the future. And we're so excited to have you as participants in our program, as sponsors of our program, as ambassadors and of our programs. And we couldn't thank you enough. So I'll now open it up for questions from the crowd. Somebody that's paying attention to the schedule more will tell me when we have to stop. But for now, I think we have time for a question or two. Okay. Oh, yeah.
I'm going to embarrass my wife here right now. Thank you. I'm Mike Frichte. We are a generational crop and cow calf in eastern South Dakota, southeastern Minnesota. I think it's easy for us as producers to understand how the cow calf thing can work really well with carbon sequestration and soil resiliency and all that. But as a producer,
maybe Jared or maybe the gentleman from Australia here can better explain to me, how do we as beef producers solve the problem with the methane component that the cattle industry has to deal with? We know the differences between those two chemicals, carbon dioxide and methane, and the resiliency of the methane. But I think from the consumer standpoint, maybe that's a question there that I don't know if we're addressing or answering really well. Thoughts?
Yeah, methane's tricky because the reason there's methane is what makes cattle so special, and so how do we do that? I think about it so how do we do that, right? If we look at LCAs from beef production, about 75% of the emissions, they're not all enteric methane emissions, but about 75% of that comes from the grazing animal, which the majority of that is going to be methane, let's just be honest. So I don't know that, probably hear about feed additives and things that we can do to adjust that rumen biome to slow methanogenesis. But I don't know that there's ever going to be a magic bean that we can use, right? I just don't believe in a silver bullet. I think if we look at other indicators, if we look at efficiency and productivity indicators, and for the methane that is produced, let's produce the most amount of beef that we can. And so we look at calving interval, we look at, just your percent weight weaned versus your cow, all of those different things. We look at genetics. I think genetics, for me, this is not proven, and this is not a McDonald's thing, it's not an FMG thing. I just think genetics is probably the biggest untapped thing that we've got. We just have to figure out how do we quantify some of this stuff. So I think if we look at, let's stop methane production in the rumen, we're going to lose that battle. Because what we want cattle to do and the service that we want them to provide, we're going to have methane production because we want to be stewards of those grazing lands. And that's just a byproduct of it, right? So we have to just kind of be honest with each other on that and say, we're not going to kill that in the animal. We might be able to affect it a little bit here and there, but let's just make sure that we're not trying to focus on that so much that then all of a sudden we're blaming the cow for having a 4-part stomach again, right? That's the way I think about it, is how do we measure different things and think about methane differently versus just stopping the production of it.
I agree with that. I mean, when you look today at what's going on, we got to properly measure the whole cycle. And that's the part that, yes, I mean, you put enough greens in me and I'll put off enough methane too. And you know, so let's think about that. But genetics by far, and everything we see, we have data on over 12 million head of harvested animals. And everyone, and we've improved quality of beef and the eating experience so much. But when we look at conversions and everything, the balance of what needs to go on with genetics is by far the number one thing that we can do to take a big leap within the improvements.
And yeah, just as the guy that is raising the beef genetics on the panel here, we definitely take that as a challenge and as a good challenge. I think we're doing more and more, and with the amount of technology available to us in the DNA aspect of cattle breeding, I could go on and on about just how far that's come in the last 5, even 3 years. And so I think there's good strides that can be made there, and as well as how more readily available some technologies like feed efficiency measurements are becoming as well is huge.
And I'll talk about a few tactical things that AgSpire is working with today. So we have our Ranching for the Future program, which is, I mentioned a soil-based program, but this is really a herd improvement program. This is dialing in on anything from health, genetics, to reproductive management, and saying, back to what you said before, is how do we produce the most pounds of beef for the least amount of methane? How do we get better at a ranch level? How do we use that data management? We've got our partners from AgriWeb in the audience that are helping us with that data capture to help make those improvements. Dr. Christina Porter is here over there, who's been working with a lot of those ranches in that pilot program to say it's not just about soil carbon. There's also functional improvements that can count as qualified reductions that help to make those companies meet their goals. And the other is a partnership, and this is the longer look. So South Dakota State University, we won't take any credit for the work they're doing, but has a lot of research focused in this area to say, really, how do we better understand what those methane production systems are and how can we improve them on grazing lands and grazing systems, but are doing amazing work. And Dr. Christy Kamak is over here in the corner if you wanted to check with her and ask her about some of that research and how that ties into that better understanding, like Tim and Don alluded to say if we understood that cycle better, we probably wouldn't penalize the methane as much from a grazing system.
Yeah, I'm curious as a cow-calf producer that also feeds cattle, I'm curious, is corporate America prepared to pass the monetary rewards down to the cow-calf operating level? You know, I remember the agent source deal. There was a premium for that, for putting the buttons in the ears, doing all of that. As a cow-calf producer, I got a benefit out of that. As a feeder, I got a benefit out of that. I appreciate AgSpire because they're reaching down to the cow-calf level with this. But I'm curious, we're helping you meet the McDonald's goals, the Walmart goals, everybody else's goals. Is there going to be a monetary reward that's going to continue to the cow-calf operator to do what we are already doing? I mean, I'll gladly do these things, but if you're going to put some monetary reward on it, I'll do it much more frequently and it'll enhance what I'm doing. But I know you guys all have to meet targets. And I know that we as producers need to reach targets too. But corporate America has to be prepared to pay that price. And Don, I don't know as a feed yard operator how that translates to you back to me if you're going to buy my calves.
The short answer is I'm going to say is yes. The people we've chatted with, there is going to be monetary rewards down to the cow-calf operator. I mean, for us, how we're building our system today, Todd, is the market's the market for the animal. But if that animal comes with X score attached to that EID, that's going to follow that clear through to my production system. I'm going to pay you the base price for the animal, whatever the market is, plus the premium that's with it due to your Garmin score is X. So you're going to get market plus whatever at the cow-calf level. That's going to carry through, and I'm going to get reimbursed for it when that animal goes to get harvested and goes on through the system. And so, yes, I do see supply chains being developed, Todd, where it is going to reward the cow-calf operator that's got measurable and verifiable things completed, an AgSpire type program that we're going to carry through. And every animal we have today in our whole feedlot operations EID. Today, what we're doing it for? Just to get the technology working at the pace of commerce. Everyone comes with all these technologies. Oh, they're the greatest. Well, good. We process an animal every 7 seconds. Let's see how good it works. And most of them don't. And so we're on our third deviation on this. But our whole goal is, yes, I do believe we will monetize carbon this year to producers at the end of this year. At end of 24, we will get hard checks back.
Yeah, and I would say from our perspective, we're trying to do that. We just don't know how. And I think it's what system can we build to incentivize in the right places at the right time. It's difficult for a system like FMG or McDonald's to incentivize the cow-calf producer because we don't buy cattle. You know, so if we're talking about if we need to break this down on a cost per pound at weaning or a dollars per head at slaughter or whatever it is, it's really difficult because we don't buy cattle. So how do we incentivize that? And I'm a firm believer in making sure that as much of the money possible gets back to the person who has most of the work in it, right? So we're not looking at it as, do we pay the packer X cents per pound more for trim? Probably not. Will there be instances that happens? Absolutely so. And I think the program you're talking about where these cattle are fully traced all the way through, I think it's easier to do that with, and we can have verifiable product. We buy 700 million pounds. We're not going to have verifiable product for 700 million pounds, I don't think. And I don't think we'll have it to the extent that helps McDonald's meet their goal. And so we're just trying to figure out what does that look like. And so we are partners in the grass is greener, and we are applying incentives there that go back directly to you.
This is probably a pointless question, but how much of this is being driven by, we've got corporate there and, it's a great panel. We always say in ag, though, 1%ers, the activists are driving things. And so you have, now, Jared, you said you had people that, come up to you at some of these deals, but those are the people that show up, as we know in cattle. The people that show up are the small part of the deal. So you got people that are saying they want stuff, but they're being told by the 1%ers that that's what they deal. So we're going through all this stuff, and I'm all for this. My motto has been there's more grass being farmed than vice versa. Been saying that for 20 years, but as I see things being plowed up. But and I don't know where this question is really going, but is that really an accurate assessment of what the hell's really going on? This is being driven by consumers that really, I'm going to refer back to the hog industry. I used to raise pigs, in the hard way. And the consumer was told, well, it's like our diets. I mean, I could go on about that, all fat and all that stuff and all the time, but you wanted lean, lean, lean. But who really likes a lean pig? I don't. There's only about 2 cuts of pork that I like, and it's bacon and a pork roast that's got some fat on it. So is that where we're getting led down this road? And maybe it'll all come back economically, but I don't know. You see where I'm going with this question? I think you got a comment.
Just a few facts around dollars. Does anyone know how much money is in retirement funds today in the United States? Get your phone out. It's about $38 trillion in the United States in retirement funds. You want to know the top 5 companies that hold those? BlackRock, $11 trillion. Now, that's not all retirement. Vanguard, Schwab, Fidelity. Now, I'm going to challenge you guys with something. Go out and look at any public company and tell me what public company, when you look at over 5% shareholders, don't have BlackRock, Fidelity, Schwab. All you guys that have IRAs, how many people vote your shares in your IRAs when elections come up? And the answer is none of us. So the people who are controlling the money are having a lot to do with this, to your point, but it's coming through the votes in the boardroom. It isn't even the 1%, it's the votes in the boardroom. Go out and lead. The CEO of BlackRock, Larry, gets pretty pointed about his. He was proud 2 years ago that he had 40 CEOs fired that didn't have a plan on how they were going to reduce carbon emissions. So it kind of goes to electric generation. 1990, 54% of the electricity in the United States was done with coal. Anyone want to guess what it's down to today? 19 at the end of last year. So my point in that is those who were forcing decisions in boardrooms, and those were public utilities that made those changes. It wasn't all done to the EPA regulation. It was done to who was voting in the boardrooms and who were driving initiatives. I said very earlier, this isn't a consumer thing as much about carbon reduction is what the shareholders are doing, and those who are controlling shareholder votes is actually pretty condensed when you look at it macroly in the United States. And I didn't mean to jump into it.
Pat. You had numbers because I did.
Well,
yeah, I'll take it on the consumer side. I mean, going back to our rental, we get to see a vast array of consumers, and kind of the common theme that we see is the older generation, they grew up in the farm, so they're familiar with it. They have trust in the system. But I'd say your millennials and younger, they have questions. Their mind's not made up on, say, the beef industry, but they definitely have questions, and they want to know more. And I think that's where it's important to get the story out there and get the correct information out there of what we're doing. Because they're still undecided, and we want to get them the facts before they're decided against us.
The conversation has switched from antibiotics and hormones so much. That used to be with consumers. That's what now it's a tougher battle, I think, when you start talking carbon.
It is, and what scares me is we're starting to figure carbon out with the help of a concerted effort with a lot of smart people. We're starting to figure that out. So my question is what's next? And it's not, I go back to, I think 75% of the business at McDonald's is done at the drive-thru. You think any of those people are thinking about their carbon emissions sitting there for 5 minutes idle in their car? Absolutely not. And so that's why, again, I go back to our deliverable for our customer is to the board and the shareholders. But that's not the story. That story will not sell with consumers because they don't care. So So yeah, it really scares me of what's next, because there's a lot of people who want to keep making everybody feel guilty for eating the best product in the world.
Good. So I'll just kind of go back, and I almost called you Travis again. Yesterday I was on the phone with Julia, and I was talking about you as Travis the whole time, and finally she's like, "Who are you talking about?" It's like, "Oh, Brady." I was calling your brother's name. I've officially entered. I know, no, you don't, but I've officially entered the stage of life where I call people by their sibling's name. It's great. It's fun. Back to that story you had about the poker game, right? And so this is where we've been sitting on our cards playing a game with a much more experienced audience that has studied how to play this for a lot longer, with industry, with energy, manufacturing, utilities, all that. And so anybody that's got a chunk of that EPA, pie graph on where emissions come from is sitting at this round table playing this card game. We have largely not looked at our cards. We have not learned to play the game. We have not been paying attention. We didn't want to play. We got invited by a friend, and we drug us there, and they're driving, and we can't leave, so we're here. And everybody knows what their cards hold and ours, and we are only recently paying the ante to actually play the game. Everybody else, you think oil companies have a real good strategy figured out on how they're going to, sequester carbon or make reductions? They make emissions as a secondary product to their product. Those opportunities are found in land management and agriculture. There is opportunities to make a large difference, like Tim had said and Don had mentioned. And so we're just now peeling back the onion a layer at a time and trying to figure out how exactly we connect that to the farm and ranch level and provide those benefits, not only quantify them, but actually keep them in the food supply chain, keep them with our products, so that we don't get left as agriculture with all of our carbon credits stripped out, bought up by an oil company or a technology company, and then left with nothing to show for how we represent our actual products. Because what we're talking about, the incentive programs and even carbon in general, is never going to be the driving factor on land use and agriculture production. It's always going to be an accessory, potential incentive. The real goal is to how do we bolster our products really, really well for the long-term future to make sure that those shareholders and companies and everybody continues to purchase them in a big way.
I can maybe do without that. Don't. This thing's scary. I want to thank you guys for putting this on. AgSpire. It's working.
Okay.
And I don't mean none of this in criticism or putting you down. I'd like it to be constructive. But you did not mention anything about cell-cultured protein. That's what I'll call it. They call it a lot of other stuff. But, Cargill, it's been about 10 years ago I looked into it, I heard about this, and I looked into, what is this anyway? So I went onto the website and whatnot, and Cargill, JBS, Bill Gates, and various other places were the startup investors for cell-cultured protein. And I don't know, did Cargill change what they're doing? I mean, we have big companies that want to move, and they want to replace the cattlemen. They want to replace, agriculture and food coming from the ground. So they have complete control. And that's what this is all about, is control. They want to control the people. They want to control the land. And, that one, I don't know how you'd address that. But, when we get talking about the consumer and what does the consumer want, I think every consumer out there wants to be healthy. And this garbage that they're raising and feeding our society, the people in America, you look around, there's a lot of obesity. There's a lot of unhealth. And we can fix that problem with agriculture. That's our job, to raise food. And food ought to make people healthy, not sick. And I think that's got to be our point. And it'll come down to, I was speaking with this, the way our food is grown, how we produce phytochemicals into the food that give people their health.
And I think that's got to be our selling point. When we talk to people, we want to make them, we're farmers that would like to raise good food that'll make people healthy instead of sick. And our government is totally against us.
Well, I would say that, there's a limited number of topics that we can get to in about an hour. I would say that we just to speak for everybody here to say that I think that as a group, we're all very aligned with the fact that we 100% are working day in, day out to keep beef, real beef, at the center of the plate. And we talk about, some of the fake meat companies are doing so badly, you almost feel bad talking about them because it's like making fun of somebody that's already really down. I joked about a year and a half ago that, we probably should take all of our investment accounts and convert them into shorting beyond meat. And that would have been a phenomenal financial strategy. But I do think that everything that we're rooted in is really, trying to encompass that message and narrative. So I do think it's along the lines of what you're looking to say. But anybody want to add anything along those lines?
Well, I would just say, I think if we think about what do all those fake meat companies try to do? They try to replicate the product, right? So that must mean we have a really good product. Imitation is the highest compliment, form of flattery, whatever it is. But they've really failed because, one, they can't do it. I think it's just a matter of, I think everything that we're talking about up here today, if we can get that story out and we're successful, and when we're successful at that, we can remove that guilt for the movable middle. Now, there's going to be a lot of people that you're never going to change their mind, right? They'd just rather eat that because an animal has to die or whatever, right? But I think it's just in the storytelling and doing that with hard facts and numbers and things like that. People don't want to be educated. They don't want to learn, but they like good stories, right? So I think it's just all around removing that guilt so that somebody doesn't have to get an overly processed bean burger that tastes more similar than the Boca burger to what we actually produce. That's my goal, is to just drive them out of business by proving that they're not better than us. They don't taste better, and their environmental outcomes aren't as good.
Thank you all for the questions. I'll turn it back to Ryan here.
Right. Well, first of all, let's give this panel a huge round of applause. Again, these are very complex issues that I think, we're really just starting to think about for the most part as an industry. And we're proud at AgSpire to be able to partner with some of the most influential businesses in the U.S. to really tackle this issue. And so it's our pleasure to work with them, and our pleasure really to work with you as producers. Because again, what we're really trying to do is find the opportunities to meet operational goals through some of these processes. And so what I really encourage each and every one of you to do, we're going to hang around here for a bit. The bar is still open. Grab a drink. Let's visit some more. But I would really encourage you, if you're not a member of the Sustain Ag Network yet, I would make sure there's a couple iPads out there. You can sign up. You can visit us. There's QR codes all over the literature. We'd really love to help you get started down this path, understanding that many of you are already down this path. And that's what we're excited about, is a lot of these programs are going to reward you for the things that you're doing today and the enhancements that you make into the future. So again, thank you for joining us. We look forward to discussions this afternoon and well into the future. So thank you.